Okay, let's do this. You ever see some form of media with such an amalgamation of interesting ideas, engaging concepts, and a fresh enough take on story and character tropes that it should by all means be a masterpiece, in your opinion at least? Well, I've seen multiple, but today the one we're talking about is RWBY. Now, have you ever seen a form of media with such poor planning, execution, and follow through on its admittedly impressive concepts that what should by all means be a masterpiece actually turns into something of a travesty? Again, I've seen multiple, but today the one we're talking about is, spoiler alert, RWBY. Standard disclaimers and warnings apply. This way lies my opinion. It's totally cool if you disagree. I mean no harm. I have the utmost respect for mostly everyone involved in the creation, and I wish them nothing but the best, especially in the light of what RT had to go through with the mini apocalyptic weather event that Texans experienced this year, as well as the global pandemic. Yeah. Yeah. Media criticism is big these days, and if we're all being honest with ourselves, sometimes it just feels good to get our feelings out about something we don't like. At the end of the day, though, I'm of the opinion that it should be something used to encourage discussion, dialogue, and growth, which is what I'm trying to do here, so, no hard feelings. I like RWBY well enough, but if you've seen my videos on it before, you'd know that I'm more of a casual fan. I don't participate in the fandom like that. I'm not very attached to the main characters. I don't theorize or even really think too hard about the show unless it's for one of these videos. But I still want to see where some of the characters that I do like end up. The world of Remnant is fascinating to me as a writer, and the RWBY fandom itself is fascinating to me as a student of the social/cultural sciences. I say all that in the interest of letting you know where I'm coming from. RWBY is an interesting case study from a creation perspective and from an audience engagement perspective, but at times you're going to find that I really don't care about a lot of the things that many other RWBY critics or supporters care about, so do with that what you will. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's talk about Volume 8 in its entirety. I've already got a video going in depth about everything I liked and disliked about the first half of Volume 8 on here. Give that a gander if you so choose, but don't expect me to take the same approach here. I'm actually glad that I chose to do a mid-season review because the second half of the volume is significantly less coherent and focused, and suffers heavily from the show's habit of poor setup, odd contrivances, and characters being dumb for the sake of the plot. It also has the unfortunate effect of retroactively making certain things in the first half even worse, considering that this is theoretically meant to be one cohesive narrative put together. I'm going to be blunt. This volume has way too much going on, and it's painfully clear that planning and resource mission management was not at its best here. This volume is overall very average, in my opinion, with a decent start, a bland midpoint, and a climax that should be intense and emotionally striking, but is held back by one of the worst displays of Deus Ex everything that I've seen from the show thus far. Anyways, enough preamble, let's just talk about it. Spoilers, by the way. You're always going to find spoilers here. I'll go into what I liked first, because there's a good bit here to enjoy. Once again, the show looks great for the most part. The colors are still popping, the characters are still emoting beautifully, and there's several very impressive set pieces to be found here. This scene where Oscar explodes Salem and Monstro is gorgeous, both visually and sonically. I like the decision to play this kind of somber piano music instead of a bombastic kind of string arrangement, which one would kind of expect. Anyways, whatever. Salem and Oscar's magic looks cool. This fight scene between Hazel and Salem is intense and brutal. Very well done. And very well done. It contributed to the atmosphere of this episode superbly. But I'll get back to that. I'm deeply impressed by this scene of the group trying to hold back Penny, especially with this POV shot of Emerald's weapons coming into frame. The score is also hauntingly effective here. It's very good. Speaking of Penny, her jerky robotic movements work really well, especially when her old shell is self-terminating. This cut right here gets across the tragic mood of these events very well. The void world that Ambrosius creates is stunning. I don't know that I like the aura shimmers as a concept, especially with how overused they are, like, all the time now. But they look pretty. Winter's maiden powers manifesting is also really pretty. This set piece here with Wise protecting the civilians is really effective for about 15 seconds, and the score is amazing. The scene of Atlas falling is hauntingly beautiful and really wraps up the tragedy of the last 2 episodes in a nice little bow. Much like the first half, the music is mostly forgettable to me, but there's a few moments where it's really, really good, and greatly elevates the emotions in some scenes for me. Overall, the voice acting is still pretty great, aside from a few questionable deliveries here and there that I would likely chalk up to simple directive choices that I don't personally understand. The cast is really delivering this volume. Oh, and it's important to note that the last 3 episodes of this volume seem to be almost completely separated from anything that comes before. Almost every single moment of episode 12 serves as a rushed and out-of-nowhere plot shift that has the unfortunate effect of making everything in episodes 13 and 14 feel like they're taking place in a completely different volume, divorced from all of the momentum and build-up of anything that came before it. It's extremely disappointing because the final 2 episodes hit hard and fast in a way that I wanted for the finale of this volume, but I can't enjoy it to the fullest extent because the setup has been completely fumbled, and thus I scrutinize the events of the episode in a way that makes everything just less enjoyable. But I digress. We'll get there. Let's talk about characters and what works for them. The pro-tags that really carry this story for me for the most part are Yang's group. Oscar is finally shaping up to have some growth and development, and I like his dynamic with Aspen. The idea that using magic acts to make their merging go faster is an interesting one, and I enjoy how he goes to bat for Emerald and the little hits of a kind of sibling-like dynamic emerging between them. Emerald herself is, I'm not gonna lie, mostly unimpressive to me, but I think I'll get more into her a bit later. She's fine, I guess, but I'm just... she's fine. She's fine. I think the kinetic energy stored up within the cane could have been set up a bit better than them simply saying that the cane is important, but whatever. I enjoyed Ren's little character growth, though the resolution may have been a bit rushed, but the scene with him and Nora is absolutely adorable. Jean really is kind of just there for the most part, but I'm fine with that because he's clearly doing his best and he's a point of comfort for the rest of the characters around him. More on him later, but I like what I'm seeing from him lately. Surprisingly enough, I've really enjoyed Yang this volume, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that she's both been separated from Blake, and the fact that the writers finally remembered that Summer was Yang's mom too. Her best moments here are when she's falling back into her sisterly, almost motherly dynamic with RWBY, and when she's finally allowed to mention and feel something about her mom. Sidebar, I have nothing against Bumblebee. I actually really like how they're handled in this volume with them being apart, but some of the show's biggest writing flops recently have surrounded Blake and Yang, and as a result, Blake and Yang together. Which is a shame because there's something very wholesome and sweet about them as partners and them as a couple and them as friends. And I just wish that the writing in the show supported that in a way that didn't take away from their relationships with other characters or make their scenes with other characters feel, I don't know, shallow. But whatever. Nora and Penny both kind of end up being the heart of this volume, individually, together, and with other characters. Most of the volume's emotional moments are thanks to these two, and I'm here for it. Nora's gone through such growth and really settled into a nuanced character this volume. I think it was smart and a refreshing decision to have her say that she needs to work on herself first before she can be with Ren in a romantic capacity. It was a healthy and admirable decision, and it actually makes me look forward to seeing what the show's going to do with her going forward. Penny ended up being surprisingly engaging as a character for me this volume, and while they unfortunately kind of dropped the ball at a very important part in her character arc, I overall enjoy what they've done. with her. There's even some potential for me to start warming up to Ruby and Blake finally. I'll get back to this scene later, but I like that Ruby and Blake actually talked to one another more and had some significant screen time together this volume. Blake really benefited from not having such central plot points revolve around her, and she's leagues more likable here than she's been in the past for me. I feel like one of the points of this volume, if they're smart, was deconstructing Ruby and her leadership style to prime us for a major arc of character growth in the near future. I really hope that we see that, because Ruby has gone through the ringer emotionally this volume, and I think this could be a really great opportunity to start examining what she actually wants from all this. Also, how she's going to grow as a leader from here on out. The decision for her to immediately conclude that her mom was made into something like the Hound and say it aloud was surprising to me, but in a good way. More on her later, but they've really got the setup to do some pretty engaging growth with Ruby from here on out, and I can't say I'm looking forward to seeing them undertake that. I'm cautiously optimistic about it. Salem's handled really well for the most part. Her voice acting and animation really sell the kind of otherworldly evil nature of her character. This moment where Oscar's waking up to see her remains one of the most effective moments any villain in this show has thus far, and I'm pleased to say that I can add this entire confrontation when the crew is attempting to escape Monstro to that list as well. She really feels insurmountable in these moments, and from the moment she bursts through the wall, it's immediately clear that there's no way that they're all making it out alive. Like I said earlier, this tussle between her and Hazel feels intense and hopeless and brutal, and it's another example of how CRWBY can randomly create masterfully done thriller/horror levels of tension in a scene. It's a bit disappointing that she was taken out of the equation of the volume so fast, given all the well-done build-up to her being an unstoppable threat earlier, but I actually think that it works on paper, subverting this and making the final threat actually be Ironwood or Cinder, and saving as many people as they can, given that Salem's the bit bad, and obviously will come back stronger in the future. Note that I said that it works on paper. Table that thought and hold it for later, because the execution leaves a lot to be desired, and we'll definitely come back to this. I maintain that I don't care about Cinder's backstory, and that the show lost its opportunity for me personally to make it matter, but it's still nice to know, I guess. I don't know. Really just, especially in light of what happens towards the end of the volume, it really feels like time that could have been devoted to something else, but whatever. What I really like is this moment between her and Watts. It's one of the most humanizing and sympathetic moments in the volume for me, and it really does wonders to make Cinder seem less one-note and boring, more so than the flashbacks in her focused episode for me, to be honest. And it's overwhelmingly fitting that it's this moment where she's arguably at her most sympathetic that spurs her on to become even more ruthless. It finally makes Cinder into something like she was back in Volume 3. Evil and believably smart. I'm so here for all of this serving to build her up into a threat again. The callous nature of her just killing people indiscriminately, to her setting up Watts and Neo, is pretty great. We love to see it. We love to hate her. The only sad thing is that Cinder at her best takes place at some of the volume's worst moments, and therefore even that is hard to enjoy, but I digress. Overall, this volume did what it set out to do and gave me the intensity and darkness that I wanted. Too bad that in order to do that, they had to ruin then or rush several character arcs and plot threads, make several characters dumb for the sake of the plot, completely destroy all believability of some of their strongest characters and character moments, and throw one of the most poorly set up and explained conflict resolutions that I've seen from the show thus far. I really think that they could have benefited from cutting several things out in the first half of this volume in service to setting up their finale better. Honestly, the best thing that they probably could have done for this volume would have been to make the decision to end it at a different point. Anyways, I've got the broad positives out of the way. I will be focusing specifically on the last 2 episodes more towards the end of the video, but for now, let's go into the things that don't work for me personally. And no offense to anyone who likes them or is touched by them or whatever. From what I can tell, it seems to be that the fandom is mostly responding positively towards the ending of this volume, but that's not me. Before I start, I should once again reiterate that I mean no harm towards anyone involved in the show's production, and I think it's very, very important that we acknowledge that we as an audience have the benefit of seeing the finished product. Given the context that we have hindsight and the ability to take this story in without any of the stress that comes with creating it for public consumption, it is very easy for us to say what works and what doesn't work. When I'm suggesting changes or things that I would have done differently, I don't claim that I wouldn't have made any mistakes trying to get this product out there, nor do I want to give off the idea that I think things are bad just because they didn't go the way I wanted them to. Yes, I think that there are things that were done wrong, and at times I find it difficult to understand how certain things went wrong when they seem so simple to me as a viewer, but I'm not doing this to attack anyone in RWBY. I don't know any of them personally, and there's nothing in this volume, thankfully, that I think is legitimately harmful to put out there, so, me trying to shame them would be absurd. This is just me giving my critiques as a learning experience for both myself and potentially anyone who watches me. An exercise in analysis, if you will. To begin, Volume 8 suffers from a lot of wasted screen time. Moments like every single scene that Robin and Crow are involved in pre-Chapter 8, probably a good quarter of the time devoted to Schnee Manor, about half the time devoted to Cinder's flashbacks, are all moments that could have ideally been cut to make room for setting up the major changes that Chapter 11 brings to the story. On their own, these moments are already relatively unengaging to me, but with the full context of what happens, they become even more of a drag in retrospect. Another thing that's pretty disappointing is that for an action anime, which is essentially what RWBY is, the action aspect can at times be very lacking. This mini fight between Salem and Hazel aside, all of the engaging action set pieces are almost entirely found within the first 7 episodes. I suppose one can make an argument for the fights in Schnee Manor, but I honestly just find myself with a bunch of questions when I watch this chapter. Why just let the hound run away here? Why is it necessary for her mom to keep an eye on this thing using the cameras? Does Weiss not remember the layout of the place she grew up in? This moment with Blake is shallow. You can maybe convince me that Blake respects RWBY as a leader, since she is in fact the one who's first to defer to RWBY from what we've seen so far. But for you to make me believe that Blake looks up to her, like she says she does in this scene, that RWBY is an inspiration to her or something, they would have needed to have actually talked in a substantial and meaningful way before this volume. Blake would have needed to have some moments of, what would RWBY do in the past volumes? Like maybe when she was in Menagerie or something. This whole scene reads like they wanted to have a Blake and RWBY moment, so they just gave Blake a generic little emotional speech. Or it also seems that maybe the scene was written with the context of deleted content in mind. Who knows, they may very well have been a few drafts in the past that have had Blake explicitly thinking of RWBY as an inspiring person or her being impressed by RWBY's positivity. But none of that is found in the show proper, so it don't work. It doesn't work. This framing is cool though. Anyways, I went on a tangent. The fights are lame in the second half for the most part. There's some picturesque moments, but the actual action is lacking. Ironwood going full on genocidal is a lot, and not in a good way. really burns me that he's so spectacularly voiced, because this performance deserved much better setup. Once Monstro explodes, Ironwood literally has no reason to not work with the kids. He has no reason to shoot down the Schnee ships. He has no reason to start going trigger happy with everyone who so much just disagrees with him. If the show had spent some more time showing him getting progressively more and more frustrated and unhinged, or if they didn't go out of their way to make him seem like an empathetic and reasonable person before this volume, I could have believed that he would go to this extreme, and subsequently the switch from focusing on Salem as a villain to him as a villain could have worked very well. As it stands, though, he very quickly devolves into almost parody levels of mean and nasty, without any meaningful examination of how he got there, or any reasonable exploration of why his subordinates are, listening to him. And then there's this vague attempt at addressing this and trying to once again humanize him in the end with his fight against Winter, but it's too late, bro. You've killed 2 civilians, Atlas civilians at that, for no justifiable reason, and you wanted to explode a whole population of people that were well on their way to not being your problem anymore anyways, and you expect me to feel something because you have a tear and you're shaking? Please. It's annoying, because juxtaposed with Ironwood is Winter, who is very engaging almost all throughout this volume. I like her quite a bit, and these moments of tension between her and Ironwood when he finds out she's gone behind his back lose a bit of their impact when Ironwood is so campishly bad that we as an audience know he's going to lose. It's a bit of the same with the Aesops, specifically Harriet, because damn, was she a waste of screen time towards the end here. I don't understand the decision to suddenly try and endear us to the Aesops other than Marrow this late in the game. They could have been an interesting medium for examining the nature of Huntsman and Atlas, and could have very well been used to provide much needed context as to why anyone is still listening to Ironwood after chapter 1 of this volume. Instead, they're little more than plot devices, and unlikable ones at that. Harriet literally shows a blatant disregard for lives at the end of here. At least Ironwood had some modicum of motivation for bombing Mantum. Harriet just tries to do it because she's angry, and for what? So Vine can die and we can see her and Elm be sad? It's a miss for me, dog. Don't care. Anyways, moving on from that. With chapter 12 in context, there's a few things that I didn't mind too much in the first half of the volume that have become particularly egregious in hindsight. Like Ruby's group losing momentum very early on in the volume. These scenes of them sitting around looking worried could have been spent with them setting up their plans for evacuating Mantle better. Instead of spending so much time lingering on the girls looking sad, you could have had some moments with Weiss and Whitley, possibly to set up the Schnee Dust Freighter thing, or you could have had Ruby and Blake pondering about Penny and the nature of the maiden powers. Maybe May could have asked what the big deal with the staff in the vault was. We of course have no way of knowing whether or not changes like this would have even worked or done any service to the immediate scenes that they took place in. But they would have at least laid the slightest bit of groundwork for the solution that the team comes up with in chapter 12. Another thing that's a little annoying is the fact that they do set up this potential conflict of the team maybe having to do something that they don't want to do. There's very good foundation laid in the early half of the volume that led me to believe that the team is going to be forced into making difficult decisions in order to save the most people that they can. It never once occurred to me that they were going to be able to Deus Ex away the multifaceted dilemma that they're in during the course of one poorly done episode. One could make an argument that this dilemma of not always being able to save everyone and everything not always working out the way you want it to is in fact explored, but in a much more interpersonal and small-scale way at the end of the volume. And fair, but I cannot stress enough that the scope and focus of the plot changes so drastically between chapters 10, 11, and 12 that most of these moments in the early volume end up feeling like they could have been time better spent because they're so divorced from the actual resolution that happens. It's really that jarring. Oscar and Osmond's conversations while they're in captivity also suffer from the full context of the volume. It's very clear now that all this talk about fairy tales and girls falling into another world acts as setup to volume 9, but that's not really necessary given Osmond's little speech in chapter 11. These moments would have been a really good time for at least one of them to mention the rules of the staff or Ambrosius. Or they could have just continued having Oscar angst about him uniting with Osmond. Like, that's fine too. But whatever. All in all, most of the major problems arise from the fact that I think that CRWBY knew that they needed to get here by the end of the volume. However, they only gave themselves one volume to accomplish this, and they packed the volume with so much happening and so many characters to focus on that there was never going to be a smooth or cohesive way for it all to flow believably. It's disappointing because this is a problem that keeps popping up in RWBY, and as the scope of the plot expands, which it is, it's going to keep happening in even more egregious ways if they follow the formula they did for this volume. So, yeah. Let's talk chapter 12. Firstly, the way this episode is structured is odd. This whole reverse cliffhanger thing they did at the beginning with the crew taking out Ironwood was not the best narrative choice for this. This type of story and narrative structure only works with appropriate tension and payoff, and this episode starts off all wrong for that. Firstly, this tussle between Ironwood and the crew is weak, plot-wise and action-wise. Ironwood's decision to let Winter be the only one who stays with him after that intensely dramatic framing of him losing trust in her last episode is questionable. This weapon is cumbersome and absurd looking. Like I said earlier, there's some picturesque frames here, but nothing interesting is actually happening in this fight. And a lot of these shots are surprisingly poorly done, given the keen attention to detail in some of the earlier episodes of this very season. Like here, unless you have the captions on, it's essentially impossible to understand what Winter is actually doing here and why it's so effective against them. From this caption, I could maybe deduce that she's using lightning dust to augment her strike here, but even that's a bit of a stretch. This scene is a letdown, which automatically makes the narrative choice for them to explain their plan after the fact completely ineffective. Everything that's happening within these moments is rushed and unengaging, which means that I'm not on the edge of my seat wondering how the hell they managed to pull this off. Which means that having them explain it after the fact is essentially just misused screen time. Oof. The only thing we really need explained that can't be easily deduced by just looking at what's happening on screen is what they're going to do with the staff. But even that explanation is weak.
Just wave it like a magic wand and make our problems go away.
Could have fooled me, bud. The rules of the staff are vague, but not in a thoughtful, open-ended way. They're vague in the sense that I don't understand what happened with Penny here. The end result was that she became a real girl, which, yay, I suppose, but for all their talk about blueprints and specific wording and how much is Penny and how much is Ambrosius, what actually happened here to make her a real girl is almost incomprehensible if you think about it too hard. And done, it's magic, just don't think about it, you might say. And that would be fine. Except they try so hard within the scene to make everything make sense. They exposit rules about the staff, they throw up blueprints, Ambrosius gives just a little spiel on what they need to provide for him, and they act like they've come prepared to provide it all, and almost none of that is substantive enough to make what happens next make sense. The only thing said here that I'm personally willing to accept as a reasonable explanation is Yang saying that the central location should be something like the vaults. I'm more than happy to let magic god shenanigans explain that away for now, but everything else? Weak, contrived, poorly planned. And like I said, this completely and utterly changes the scope of the volume. All of the tension of saving Mantle and Atlas citizens while fighting Salem and dodging Ironwood, gone. Cinder is now our 11th hour main villain, and the main threat is once again her potentially getting the relics and the maiden powers. Volume 5, anybody? Anybody? Or is it just me? Maybe it's just me. Sidebar. Does Osmond plan on bringing the relics together to call the gods or something? Because honestly, why are they taking the staff with them? Penny is the maiden. They could have very well just locked it in here and Salem would have been shit out of luck. I suppose there's definitely an argument for bringing it along to use Ambrosius at a later time, but no one makes that argument? I don't know. Like I said, the setup for the staff in Ambrosius is absolute crap. This results in these final episodes being a finale for nothing, really. All the tension and momentum of the volume up to this point is dropped, and these last episodes become little more than an extended teaser for what's going to happen in Volume 9. Chapters 13 and 14 are a little bit better, but these ones really highlight some of the flaws that RWBY as an entire, show have kind of just glossed over and never really found a way to address. For one, the main tension and emotional conflict of this episode begins with Yang falling. But I have to turn my brain off to buy into this. You're telling me not a single one of the girls could have reached Yang before she fell. You're also telling me that this single strike from Neo, that we don't see connect, by the way, was enough to just completely wreck Yang's aura and send her unconscious? You see, the problem here is that when you've established on screen multiple times that these characters are capable of superhuman feats like these, and you've never given any in-universe explanation as to why they no longer perform them, moments like these fall apart under scrutiny, because there's no reason Yang had to fall here from that. And while I'm all for Blake getting these moments throughout the last 2 episodes, these little emotional moments, they're nice, I guess. It's deeply annoying that RWBY's reaction is glossed over. Why was Penny lingering here so long? She was right there. The moment she didn't immediately step through, I knew that she was going to die. Like I mentioned earlier, the action is subpar, and it's super apparent in the fighting against Neo. This just looks boring. Weiss, Penny, and eventually John end up carrying these last 2 episodes for me. One thing I will say that I like is how desperately Weiss fights back this entire time. This scene with her using Gamble Shroud actually really tugged on my heartstrings, and I find it pretty thematically appropriate that she's the last of the team standing. She started out as the least willing to work in the team way back when, evolved into something kind of like the team mom and cheerleader lately. And despite her inaction for most of the volume, this is her home. They've just left, and I don't know. You can call me biased because I am, but Weiss is just my favorite member of Team RWBY, and I just enjoyed what I saw from her these last 2 episodes for the most part. We were robbed of this fight. I was actually getting pretty hyped right here. Winter becoming the maiden is fine, I guess. I just kind of have to question why they think it's a good idea to keep making supporting characters step up so far in importance to the story when they still have underdeveloped and underutilized main characters. But it all looks very pretty, and this was a very touching and emotional scene at the end here. Whatever. John really got me this chapter. I know that there's a trend to hating him whenever he gets an important moment in the plot, given the lack of agency and consistent development from our main character, and that's a very real criticism to levy, but not here in my opinion. This is really good. Not just because the scene was done well and the performance was great, but because it sets up a potential ideological struggle between our 2 leaders. RWBY didn't even entertain the idea of Mercy killing Penny when it was suggested earlier in, but John made the nuanced and difficult choice to do so because he could see that there was no other choice, and he trusted in Penny to make this decision for herself. And seeing as though he fell with the rest of them at the end, I can see this potentially being something that's brought up and addressed in the next volume, and I think that the 2 of them have a lot of great opportunity for growth from this point on. Anyways, is there anything left to talk about? This happens? Don't care, but you probably knew that already. Screw Maria and Pietro, I guess. This is a hauntingly effective last sequence, and Crow's expression was almost enough to move me to tears, but I hate that Harriet and Elm are here. I don't like that Robin's here either, but I expected that she would stick around for a while, so I'm just going to accept it. Her little speech to him earlier on wasn't that bad, I guess. Still can't stand her. But whatever. Ironwood was being dumb again. I don't think this is the last we're going to see of him, but I don't know how they're going to bring him back from this. Both, like, having him live and from, like, a character assassination point of view. Like, I don't understand. If he doesn't die here, I don't understand how we're supposed to accept Ironwood back into the narrative as anything other than a lunatic after this. But time will tell. This shot of Nora falling to her knees also almost moved me to tears. I guess that's it. Overall, Volume 8 is okay, I guess. It has some really great moments, some really inspired ideas, but the execution isn't always there. There's far too many instances of something happening just cause. It has an okay start, some strong momentum in the middle, but it sputters off to an unsatisfying conclusion, which is a theme I'm noticing within RWBY. Anyways, even if things that happen in the last chapter are enough on their own to make me feel things, when taken into context of the volume, I can't in good conscience say that it was well done. One of the most consistent things with RWBY is that it consistently has nigh unlimited potential, and I think that's what keeps me coming back to watch it. That and the fact that it's a good study for storytellers in terms of what can work and what absolutely doesn't work. However, the other consistent is that it tends to fumble the ball when it should reasonably be at its best. It's disappointing, and it's enough to make me wonder if the crew behind RWBY is really equipped to tell such a high-concept story. There's a lot to think about when it comes to RWBY as far as the world that they've created, and at times it really kind of seems like there's too much for the team to cohesively spin a narrative from. That all being said, I do have things that I'm looking forward to seeing from here on out, so it's certainly not a total loss. I don't regret the time spent watching this volume, and I guess I'll be back to see where it goes next. And like I said, this is a fun show and fandom to study, so you might hear more from me about the show in general, even before then. But, yeah, that's it, I guess. Like, subscribe, comment if you want, if you feel like it. I do things like this. Let me know what you thought down below. Or don't. And, we'll see you next time. Yeah, bye-bye.